Content warning. This episode includes discussion of self-harm, addiction, and suicide. Have you ever had to deal with the problem of someone you know, like a family member or a friend, who's gone missing? There's this weird mixture of emotions, like frustration, because you just don't know where this person is. And it's also scary, because you don't know what happened. My mom got a little taste of what that's like years ago. And the person that was missing was me. I was 5 years old, and it was my very first day of school. Personally, I don't remember that this happened, but my mom does.
So it was your first day of school, going to kindergarten. You were about 5, and we knew what time the bus was going to bring you back. We knew that the bus driver would let you off in front of our house. And so we were waiting, camera in hand, to get your picture coming off the bus. We were so excited. And the bus came down the road, and of course we were at the end of the driveway waiting, and the bus driver said, "Your little boy is not on my bus."
So when the bus driver says, "Sorry, I don't know where your kid is, but I don't have him," how does a parent even react to that?
We were shocked, because you should have been on that bus. You had never ridden a school bus before because you're 5. It's your first day of school. So we went in the house and called the principal. And the principal said that he would look into it. He would ask questions of different people. He would look into it and find out where you were. And so he found that you made a friend on the first day of school, and that little boy invited you to his house after school to play with his toys at his house.
Yeah, that kind of sounds like me. Sorry, Mom, I'm just too busy to come home after school this afternoon. But I did catch a ride home later.
The principal went over there and picked you up and brought you home.
And the next day, I made sure to get on the right bus home.
So the second day, we were out at the end of the driveway watching for the bus, and the bus stopped, and you got off and came around in front of the bus, and we took a lot of pictures. And I have those pictures to remind me of that horrible day when my 5-year-old was missing.
My mom was only 26 years old at the time, so I can imagine the stress and worry she felt during that time when she didn't know where I was, and the relief when she saw me again just a short time later. But not all missing person stories are resolved that quickly or that easily. The story you're about to hear is from Alice, and it's about the time when her brother, Jake, disappeared. Their whole family was worried, and they reported Jake to the police as a missing person. But eventually, even the police gave up looking for Jake, and Alice knew it was up to her and the rest of the family to find him. Real people in unreal situations.
There is a girl hanging by her broken leg from the telephone wire.
And I called 911 and I said, I found a baby.
I turned around. I see a gun pointed at me close enough I could touch it.
She would hold our heads underwater all the time.
He levels the gun, pulls the trigger, and I go down.
Her eyes were full of tears. She didn't want to leave us.
My hair catches on fire.
I swear to God, this image is burned in my head for the rest of my life.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? And just before we hear from Alice, it's time for a podcast recommendation. This show is called Some of My Best Friends Are. The hosts are Harvard professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad and journalist Ben Austin, and their friends, one black and one white, who grew up together on the south side of Chicago. And now, as adults, Khalil and Ben are still best friends, but they know that interracial friendships aren't going to solve the problems of a deeply divided country. So on their podcast, Some of My Best Friends Are, Khalil and Ben have real talks about the absurdities and the intricacies of race in America. I listened recently to an episode where they discussed the real facts behind CRT, critical race theory, and I definitely came away with a better understanding of it. And they invite guests to speak with them, people like Attorney General Eric Holder, Danielle Sered, and Sherman Dilla Thomas. You'll hear critical conversations that are personal, political, maybe even a little playful sometimes. Again, the show is called Some of My Best Friends Are, and you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. And now, here's my conversation with Alice. Before this happened, had you had any experience at all with searching for a missing person?
None. No experience besides, what you see on the news or on TV.
Just hearing about other missing people.
Yes.
Sometimes, right? Okay. You grew up with Jake as your younger brother. And who else was in the family? What other siblings did you have?
So I have a twin sister. We're the oldest. We have a brother, and then Jake, and then a younger sister. So there's 5 of us. My twin sister and I, when our parents divorced, we moved in with our grandparents, and the others kind of bounced around, initially moving with our mom, but they kind of had we all had a chaotic childhood.
And where did you grow up? Where was this?
It was a very small town in Utah. Very rural, no stoplights. It was very small, religious community.
Can you talk about the time several years ago when Jake came to live with you and your husband?
I had been married maybe 2 years at that point, and I had just had my first baby. And actually, I was talking to Jake on the phone, and he was an alcoholic. He had his first drink when he was about 9 years old, and he said immediately he became hooked, and he chased that sense of, I don't know, just, I guess, trying to evade his feelings for his whole life. Anyway, he started using drugs and drinking, and he was talking to me about just wanting to get clean. And so on a whim, we invited him to come and live with us. I mean, it was a big risk. We had a new little baby, but we decided, we listened. He set some goals. He wanted to get clean. We wanted to help him start his education, get a job, and find some direction in his life. So he agreed. And we kind of set it up maybe like a rehab environment where we had strict rules. He wanted to quit smoking and quit drinking. So we required 100% abstinence from those things. God was important to him. And so he wanted to establish a relationship with God. So he would attend and participate in church. Anyway, so we had a lot of strict rules that he had to follow. And if he broke any of those rules, then it was an opportunity lost. Anyway, he excelled. He was successful. He started working for my husband. He was really happy. It was a really good experience for him. And my baby was probably one of the most profound experiences for him during that time because, I don't know, holding a baby, they just look at you with so much innocence and love that I think maybe for the first time in his life, he just really experienced a sense of truly being loved.
Yeah, when a baby looks at you, there's no judgment at all.
No, there's no judgment, and it's just pure joy looking into a little baby's eyes.
It sounds like, the phrase cold turkey, would that apply here for him?
Yes, and we had established before he came a therapist, a psychiatrist, a doctor. In fact, I even met with those people before he moved in with me and asked them questions and for advice. And yeah, so we had some help in deciding those things. It was cold turkey, and he did it. It was impressive. I mean, I was very amazed.
He had to be kind of excited about his life turning around at that point.
He was excited about it turning around. I think he was proud of himself. I think he surprised himself. He was amazing, but drugs and alcohol just tormented him.
Was he able to maintain that?
So he stayed clean for the time that he lived with me, and for the following, I think it was about 3 years afterwards, he stayed clean. He ended up even doing some missionary service for the church that he was attending. So he did stay clean for about 3 years. And once he started using again, then, it's just a spiral of repetitive behavior. I mean, by then I had 2 kids. So we just sort of, I wouldn't say cut ties because I was in contact with him, but I definitely didn't want any drugs around my baby. I just felt protecting them from his choices was more important than inviting him into my home and my life, which is a hard choice to make when you love somebody.
Right. Yeah. Your brother or your children.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking.
Did you consider at all, considering the success that he had before when he came to live with you, saying, hey, come back, let's do it again? Did you think about that at all?
No. I mean, initially, after about 3 years, he was going back to school. He had completed his missionary service, and when he moved back, we did offer him to come home and stay with us, and go to school. We encouraged him to not go back to the previous environment where he was comfortable using, and his friends were those who also drank and were using drugs. I think it's not a good idea to go back into that environment. But he chose to do that for a couple of weeks, and he just immediately reverted back to those behaviors. So it just was a quick switch.
You got a text message from Jake on a Friday.
Yes. So on a Friday, I got a bizarre text from Jake where he said something along the lines of, pray for him. He lost his leg. He can't live without his leg. To me, it was nonsense. So I just thought, oh, here we go again. Another spiral. I am not getting involved. And I quickly deleted the text. Like usual, it was this history of, I don't know, bizarre behavior in and out of jail. And at some point over the years, I just decided to stop getting involved. I ignored it all. It was too much drama for me in my life. So that Friday, I deleted the text. Although I do remember thinking, I wonder what he feels like the next day or whenever he sobers up and he checks his phone and nobody responds to him. Everybody has just written him off. I wonder if he's embarrassed. I wonder if it makes him feel sad or if he thinks, oh, good, everyone just ignored me. And I thought, I wonder if I just told him I love him, what would that do? It wouldn't cause any harm, I'm sure. But ultimately, I just decided, no, I'm not getting involved. So I just deleted the text and moved on with my life. It was Mother's Day coming up, and I was a mother, so it was a day about me, and I did not want his drama. So on Mother's Day, my mom, I can't remember if she called me or if she just texted me, but I talked to her, and she said your brother is missing. Nobody has heard from him since Friday. And they were a little concerned. But Jake was, like I said, in and out of rehabs and jail. He often would even call the police on himself. So they would come and pick him up and put him in jail to give him time to sober up. But he always got in touch with somebody the next day. He was really good about checking in, especially with my mom. They had a very codependent relationship, but he did good at not disappearing. So a couple of days was a little bizarre for him, to not be heard from. He actually also was posting on Facebook. He was constantly sharing things on his social media. And so there was no activity either on Facebook, which was a little disconcerting to everybody because, he's an addict. Who can resist putting their phone down for even 10 or 20 minutes, when they're constantly posting, and going 2 days would take a whole lot of self-control that maybe he didn't have.
What was the last time anyone had communicated with him?
On that Friday that I got a text that I deleted, he had an explosive phone conversation with my dad. So Jake had been working. He got a job as a farmhand. And so he'd been working on this farm fairly regularly. And I think he had an agreement with our dad that my dad would supply every day a dose of methadone, I think it's called, so that he was trying to get off of opiates.
From my understanding, methadone is kind of like what you take when you're trying to get off of actual methamphetamine.
Yeah, meth was definitely his drug of choice, although he used anything and everything he could. But yes, he was taking methadone, trying to keep his job and live a stable life. And so my dad, I believe, was supplying him with his dose of methadone every day because Jake couldn't handle it on his own. So they had an explosive argument that same day, and Jake said to my dad, I can't remember exactly what the argument was about. I don't think I really ever knew all of the details. But at some point, Jake said, "You know what this means, don't you?" And my dad said, "Yes, I know what this means, and that scares me for you." And the call abruptly ended. He hung up, angry. And Jake had made threats like that before. So my dad really just left it alone. It was just another kind of threat of self-harm, but that was something Jake used often to manipulate, well, at least what we judged him to be manipulating us, to get what he needed and wanted. That was the last time anyone had spoken to him as far as I knew. My dad didn't call anybody or report it, but the farmer that Jake was working for called the police because Jake didn't show up to work. I believe it was on Friday evening, and by Saturday morning, a red four-wheeler was missing, and Jake was also not at work. And so the farmer was furious. He thought Jake took off with his four-wheeler and ditched him to meet his druggy friends. And
which was not an unreasonable assumption, right?
No, so he reported that as stolen, and that's how the police got involved and found out about the conversation with my dad. But otherwise, nobody had seen anything. Nobody saw when he left or...
When he said to your dad, "You know what this means," and your dad knew what it meant.
Yes.
The implication there was suicide?
The implication there, yes, I believe was suicide. Jake had struggled with self-harm. He cut himself often. So yes, he threatened suicide often. In fact, I remember always believing that someday Jake was going to end up hurting himself. My siblings and I had conversations where we just would hope Jake ended up in jail or prison, or he was going to end up dead.
You had mentioned that you kind of saw this as part of what you called the cycle.
Yes.
Had this happened before, or what are you referring to as the cycle?
The cycle, I think, is manipulation. Jake was angry. I think he was hurting inside. He had a difficult life. And so he just tried to avoid his feelings. So he would start using again. And then when he was using, he would, I don't know, I guess he would, manipulate. He would threaten to hurt himself, anything he could to get away with whatever he needed to feed his addiction. I think he needed more methadone. I think he wanted money. Sometimes I think he even wanted attention. So I guess the cycle was just destructive behavior. Manipulative communication. It just always maybe felt tricked. Just felt like we were going to get involved in feeding his addiction, and nobody wanted to be responsible for that. And he would get stuck in his choices. He would be so hooked on drugs that he needed a way out. And so I guess that's part of the cycle too, is either he would end up just wanting to hurt himself or kill himself or get locked up.
I've heard it said that people who are sometimes suicidal don't really want to die. They just want the pain to go away.
Yes, I've heard that too. I think that must have been true for Jake because he did threaten suicide often, and he also hurt himself often. He cut himself. I think he wanted the pain to go away, and he had threatened so many times, but he didn't die. So I think that was absolutely true for him.
At what point did you realize something's definitely wrong?
That Sunday, that was Mother's Day, in the back of my mind, I knew, I don't know, I just had a feeling that something was different this time. I was annoyed because it was interfering with my day, which makes me feel very selfish. But that day, I guess I was just being selfish. Yeah, I just thought something's wrong. The fact that he wasn't posting on Facebook is really what made me think he didn't have enough self-control to just step away like that. By Monday, my sister and we started talking about it immediately. So she must have felt too that something was not right. So by Monday, we hadn't heard anything. The police posted a missing person kind of announcement on their Facebook asking if anyone has seen him to call. And at that point, I thought, okay, this maybe is serious. So by Monday, I knew something was very wrong.
So what do you do at that point? I mean, you think he's missing, but what was your plan of action?
Well, yeah, I mean, when somebody goes missing, like I said, you see it on the news and on TV, but where do you even start? I mean, the world is a big place. So when somebody goes missing, I mean, we just really started, we were frantic, I guess. We started sharing the post that the police put up for a missing person, and we printed it into posters. We just really started guessing, doing everything we can, which really started with the missing person posters, I guess. My husband and I decided, well, let's drive to that little town where he went missing. Maybe we can talk to the police. Maybe we can drive to the farm and talk to the farmer. We had so many questions. At that point, I didn't know about the conversation he had with my dad or anything. So really all I knew was I had a bizarre text and my mom said he was missing, and then the police were apparently involved. My husband he was not really on board. He thought it was just drama and that I was just getting myself into a mess again, but I did convince him to drive. It took us about 4 hours to drive to that town.
Oh, so it wasn't like the next town over. It was a drive.
Oh yeah, we didn't live there where he was living, so we had to, and we drove to the farm. The farmer showed us it was a little cabin that Jake was staying in the night before, at least. The fridge, Jake had been angry. He tipped the fridge over. He had thrown food and things all over the wall. The whole little cabin was just destroyed. It was a mess.
It's no wonder he was mad then.
Yeah, he was very angry.
All of that on top of the stolen four-wheeler.
Yes. Yeah. The farmer was very upset.
So logistically, this seems kind of difficult. I mean, he was 4 hours away from you. You can't just move there and continue to look for him.
No, and Jake was kind of transient. He didn't live anywhere. This farm that he was working on, he would stay in a cabin that was an Airbnb. So if nobody had it reserved, then he would stay there. Otherwise, he just, I think, would sleep in the mountains. He just would take a sleeping bag and find somewhere to sleep for the night. And the four-wheeler was missing, but nobody even knew what direction he went in. My brother thought he went to Oregon for some reason, or that he was going to make his way to his house to visit him. He wasn't worried. So logistically, yeah, it was hard to know where to start. We thought, do we just go look for him, and where do we go look? We went to the farm, and where do we go from there? There's mountains in the west, there's mountains on the east side. So as far as logistics, I mean, it was just like throwing a dart in the dark. We had no idea where to begin.
If you haven't finished your holiday shopping yet, don't worry. There's no need to panic. I've got a secret source for incredible gifts that are completely original. It's a place called Uncommon Goods. Uncommon Goods has the absolute best gifts for everyone in your life. I'm talking your mom or dad, teenagers, your in-laws, your best friends, even your special one and only person. This is not stuff you can find just anywhere. Uncommon Goods has unique gifts that are creative. Usually they're handmade by independent artists and creators. Don't settle for something that screams out last minute like a boring gift card. Instead, find something that's truly original at Uncommon Goods. One of the cool items I found that they offer is a framed piece of art called Family Fire Pit. This is a color portrait of a family sitting around a campfire, and it's customizable to your family. You can mix and match figures, skin tones, hair colors, and even include the family pets in the painting. I mean, come on, we wouldn't be sitting around a campfire without our pups, right? I can't wait to see the reactions on this one because I know my wife is going to love it. Like I said, Uncommon Goods is my secret source for really original gifts, and now it's your secret too. And you can get 15% off the next gift you buy. Just go to uncommongoods.com/what. This is a limited time offer at uncommongoods.com/what to get 15% off. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. And thanks to Uncommon Goods for sponsoring this podcast.
The police said that initially, the first few days, they found out places where Jake was known to frequent in the mountain. So they just kind of drove on the main road heading into a canyon and looked around. They did tell us they searched spent about 200 man hours looking around for him, but there was no trace, no evidence that led to anything. So after a couple of days, there was nothing else they really felt they could do. So they had quit searching for him. And that's when we decided, well, do we search for him on our own? And the police weren't really, I don't know if they weren't supportive, but they did not think it was a good idea for us to be doing on our own for several reasons.
Why would they think that it's not good for you to search on your own?
I think liability, for one. There was private property. I mean, these mountains were very rugged, and we were inexperienced. We had never even spent time in those mountains, so they didn't want any other injuries or anybody else going missing where they would have to go in and rescue them. So I think it was just them not feeling comfortable with our abilities. And of course, if something else had happened, if there was a crime, I mean, you don't want people stumbling onto a crime scene and corrupting any kind of evidence.
But from your standpoint, I would feel like there's an increased sense of urgency.
Yes, we started to feel a sense of urgency. So in the beginning, after just a few days, and really by the next weekend, we had driven to the town where he went missing, and there just the urgency just built. My husband finally realized that this is a bigger deal than he was thinking, so he was on board. When we were driving to the town, it's a small town, and my mom had tried talking to the police, but they weren't very receptive to her. And I felt like they wouldn't be very receptive to me. I think maybe because I'm female, it's a small town, it's a boys' club. So I wanted my husband to call and talk to them, but he was uncomfortable. So I just took my phone and I dialed the number and I gave it to my husband and I said, just say hello. I just made him make this phone call. And after he talked to them, he realized that it is up to us. My sister lives in Colorado, so she wasn't there at that time, but she was also feeling like, yes, we need to go look for him. I mean, is he injured? We had no idea what happened. We didn't know. I mean, like I said, he had threatened to hurt himself before, but he had never really followed through with it. So we just had no idea what happened. The police weren't going to find him. If we didn't do something, then nothing was going to happen. We weren't going to find him. He would just disappear. So yes, the urgency was building. We weren't sleeping. We were just ideas coming to us. Do we just walk into the mountains? I mean, we don't even know how to go on a hike in the mountains. We don't have hiking shoes. We really had no idea what to do.
When you say we, who is the group that's actively involved in this? It's you and your husband and your mom and dad?
So when I say we, honestly, I think that's my twin sister and I. I just kind of speak as if we are one person. So when I say we, it's mostly her and I that are talking and deciding what course of action are we going to take. And yes, my husband too was involved, and he became part of the we. I didn't really have a super strong relationship with my parents. Like I said, my sister and I ended up living with our grandparents. They raised us. So, we would communicate occasionally with them, but they lived their own lives. So really, the only thing we had in common at that point was Jake was missing. And my mom she decided on the side of the police that it wasn't worth the liability to go out and search for him. That was asking too much. And my dad had a surgery, so he wasn't feeling very well. In fact, I think he was pretty sick. He was on crutches and he couldn't get around. So, and again, he had dealt with this with Jake before. So I think to him, maybe it wasn't seeming quite as urgent at that point, or he just knew there was nothing he could do. It was in Jake's hands.
I can imagine from his perspective, having been through this kind of drama before,
yes,
that he says, we're going to go through all this trouble and then find out that he's fine somewhere. And now we all look like fools because we were so worried about him again.
Yes. And we got caught up in it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I definitely can't judge him for that either, because I think he was trying with Jake, but again, he did maybe everything he felt he could do. So our next step is my husband got on board, and he's very logical. So he logistically, he got out a pen and a paper and he wrote down, he mapped out, I guess the next step is we decided to search. We were going to start where the police started and left off, and we would branch out from there. So Memorial Day was coming up. By Memorial Day, it had been almost 3 weeks of him missing. So we thought, well, this weekend is perfect. We will have hung posters up. There will be people in the mountains because it's warming up enough for them to get further into the mountains, so people will know to look for him. So my husband decided, he talked to the police and he found out the areas where they started and left off, and then he just created a plan to branch off from there. And really, my sister and I would talk on the phone and we would decide, okay, we need to probably have like a registration table if we're going to have other people join us for this search, or is it just going to be us? If other people come, we're going to have to make sure we have their names and their phone numbers and what they're driving, or, some information in case they go missing or get injured, so we can keep track of people. It really just unfolded by the hour. I didn't know anyone who had ever searched for somebody like this before.
But it sounds like your husband had the sense of organization to put structure to the search.
Yeah, he was a little more emotionally removed. So he stepped in and he was very structured. He's an engineer, and he just came together with this plan as far as what to do next, where to start. He found the coordinates for the canyons we were going to start in. He created a post asking for volunteers, but the police did not want us having very many people going into those mountains, again, because of private property and the terrain was very rugged. So yes, Casey was very logical. He laid out the plan. He went to the farm and set up an area where people could come and park their cars. He was clear on the police were not going to be helping us. They weren't supporting our search or participating or providing any resources. So he had just all of their rules ready and laid out for us. The morning of the search, my husband, like I said, went early. He took a trailer or camping trailer to that farm and parked it there. And then the morning of the search, I think there was maybe 30 people who showed up. It wasn't too many. We were hoping initially to just have as many as possible, hundreds if we could, because it was such a big area. I don't know how much time you've spent in the mountains in Utah, but it's overwhelmingly big. And you look out into this area of even just trees and you think, we have to look behind every one of those trees, and it's impossible. It's huge. It's overwhelming. But we had about 30 people show up, and it was just random people who knew Jake, or maybe they knew my mom, or to some of our friends. A few of Jake's friends showed up. One of them was a sheep herder. Oh no, he was a hunter, and he came with a spotting scope, and he and his wife went to the very top of a mountain, and they were going to just use that spotting scope and search through that, just as much area as they could cover. So they had coordinates that they were marking off, just looking for what we were looking for. Really was a red 4-wheeler. We thought maybe that would be a place to start to find that. So there was also, people showed up with horses, so they took their horses into the canyons. My husband had 3 designated canyons that we were going to start in, and they would go to the top of that canyon and just work their way down. So we had hiking teams, we had horse teams, we had a drone team. They volunteered their technology and they came. There's a lot of just really random people who was very surprising to show up and just show how important Jake was to them, because at that point we just felt like Jake was just kind of a forgotten soul. He's in and out of jail. He was a drug addict. He wasn't important enough to even the police to be out there using their resources, although they did do everything that they could.
That had to be encouraging to have that group of people all wanting to come together. And
it was incredible. Yes. Yeah. We had ATVs and side-by-sides, 4-wheelers, just everybody took what resource they had, and coming together as a combination was just beautiful. We didn't have any hiking experience or anything really. We even had to borrow a 4-wheeler to take with us so that we could participate and get into the mountains. So anyway, everyone just taking what they had, maybe as a whole. We couldn't have done it on our own, but every person with whatever little resource they had as a combination just turned out to be a beautiful sight. We opened up the first day of the hike, all circled together to get instructions from my husband, and it was just amazing. It was urgent and it was scary and it was emotional, but it was exciting too.
Did you have a sense that, wow, this is the day we're going to find him?
Yes. I woke up that morning, the first day of the search, and the instant I woke up, I just felt overwhelmed with the idea that today is the day we're going to find Jake. And I even felt like I needed to do whatever I could to get up into those mountains, because I would find him if I was willing to do that. So I just knew today was going to be the day, even though we had about 4 days of searching planned. I just knew it was going to be that day. And so I felt the urgency. We had one canyon that we were missing a hiking team. So my sisters and I decided, well, we'll be that hiking team then. We just decided to go and get dropped off at the top of the canyon. And there is no trails. We got dropped off at the top of a ravine and we just climbed steep walls, and it was muddy and giant boulders, and we just had to work our way down the mountain without any real hiking gear. I told my husband, my sisters and I were going to be the hiking team, and he said, no, you're not. You can't do that. It's too dangerous. And I said, well, we are going. You can join us or you can stay here, but either way, we are going to do this. So he told me to get a backpack and get ready to go, and he would join us. And I had no idea. I'm not outdoorsy at all. So I grabbed a backpack, but I didn't put anything in it. I just grabbed the backpack. So we showed up at the top.
Well, you did what he said to do, right?
Yes. Yes, he was just thinking, Oh, no.
It's no wonder he didn't want you to go out there.
Yes.
Right? So you were in a group of 4.
Yes, my 2 sisters, myself, and my husband were in a group of 4, and we took the third canyon. Can't even remember what it's called. We drove our 4-wheeler that we had borrowed to the very top of the canyon and left it there, and we just started climbing. We got out our first step on the ground and our feet just sunk into the mud, and we thought, oh no, this is going to be a wild day.
So you started at the top, and you were climbing downhill the whole time. Is that right?
We were climbing downhill, but we also had to climb up, just steep rock walls to get up and around, the boulders. It was a deep ravine, and we wanted to climb down into it to see if we could see anything. There were cliffs. Jake could have rolled the 4-wheeler and fallen into the ravine, or, he could have been anywhere. So yes, we started at the top and we worked our way. It was up and down. The terrain was incredible. It was beautiful, but it was by far one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not only hiking, but searching for Jake too.
You know how it is when you find a podcast you love, you end up telling your friends and everyone else about it because you want them to discover how great it is too. Well, that's how I am with the Jordan Harbinger Show. I've told so many people about it since I found it and subscribed, and that was years ago. The great thing about Jordan's show, or one of the great things, I should say, is I never know what's coming next. He might be talking to a best-selling psychology author one day, and the next day is a former mafia hitman, and after that, an astrophysicist or an athlete. It's always something different, and it's always interesting. One episode that I found really intriguing was with Steve Rambam. This guy was a private investigator for over 40 years, and wow, did he have some stories to tell. Another one was just recently. This was a conversation with Dr. Shahom Doss, who's a forensic psychiatrist who works in prisons. This guy assesses criminals and figures out which ones are mentally ill and which ones are faking it. There's a lot more to it, of course. He explains everything. The Jordan Harbinger Show is one that I look forward to each week because he's got the ability to pull out stories and tactical bits of wisdom from his guest, no matter who he's talking to. It's no surprise that his show is one of the top-rated podcasts. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's Harb as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks to The Jordan Harbinger Show for sponsoring this episode.
There was no trail. The police had kind of already taken the typical trails, that they could just drive a truck.
Right, the easy ones.
Onto, but yeah, there was no path. We really were just going dependent on hope and determination to find our brother. We were just willing to do anything and everything. And I believe in God. And so I really just depended on him for direction. Even the 3 weeks leading up to this search, I just really prayed hard for the right ideas and to know the right place to look, the places to begin. And so we really just hoped God was really out there and he would direct us where to go.
Did you set a particular time to call it off for that day and meet up, or how long did you plan to be out?
We didn't want to be out past dark. So we asked everyone to be back before the sun set. So for that day, that was all we had planned. Whether it took 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, however much daylight we had, that's what we were going to do that day. And if we didn't find anything, we would get up and do it again the next morning.
So you had to kind of build into that the fact that you had to get back to the 4-wheeler and then get back to the original meeting point before dark.
Yes. I don't think that was, I think in my mind personally, I was not coming home without my brother. I was going into that mountains and I was going to find him and I was going to come back with him. That's really all I even considered. I think the plan was, to go and be back before dark, but I just was not going to go back without my brother.
Did you still feel that confident at the end of the day?
I did for some reason. So we made it all the way to the bottom of this canyon and we had found nothing. So we had cell phone service through the mountains, which was a little unexpected. And we had heard other teams had finished their areas and were coming out. Everyone was checking in at our little registration areas, checking out for the day. Nobody saw anything or found anything. And so we had called somebody to come to us and pick us up so that they could drive us back to the top to get our four-wheeler. And my husband said to my sisters and I to get in with another person and they would take us back to the cabin where everything began, where we started. And I said, no, I can't go back. We didn't find him. And I know today's the day we're going to find him. And so my sisters got in and they went back to the cabin so that they could eat. And I stayed with my husband. I even told him, I need you to stay with me because I need you to be there when we find him. So he let me get in and we started driving back up to the top of the mountain when he got a phone call from that old deer hunter. The deer hunter called my husband's phone and said he saw something through his spotting scope that was red. And of course, we were hopeful it was the red four-wheeler, but it was so far away, he couldn't tell what it was. It just was something red. The four-wheeler that my husband and I had left at the top of that canyon was also red. So this deer hunter said, it's probably just yours, but I'll stay on the phone with you just to make sure. So we just raced to get to our four-wheeler and we said, okay, we're here. And he said, you're not there. So it wasn't our red four-wheeler that he was looking at. So and I knew at that point, I thought, okay, this is it. We're going to find Jake. So my husband jumped on the four-wheeler. I took the phone and this deer hunter, he would just say, go a little more east or a little more south, a little now west that way. And he just he used his spotting scope. He kept one on my yellow shirt and one on this red spot that he had seen, and he just directed us. And we were just racing. It was starting to rain. We were driving so fast. We felt the urgency to just get there. And it was so rugged that we ended up getting a flat tire on our four-wheeler. So we jumped off that four-wheeler and just started running. We were racing. And at one point, the deer hunter who was still on top of the mountain said, I lost you. So I had to climb up on top of this big boulder until he could find my yellow shirt. Anyway, and then he led us and we walked right up to a red four-wheeler and it was obviously wrecked. It also had a flat tire. It had some broken pieces off of it. It was in bad shape, but it was a red four-wheeler. And I looked at my husband and my husband's face was just relieved. And he said, oh, he's not here. That means that's great news. We'll call the police, say we found the red four-wheeler and he's not here, which means there's still hope. He's, alive. And I just remember seeing the relief on his face and this just sense of calm but urgent sense of calm came over me, and I thought, just keep going, keep walking. And so I started walking ahead while my husband was making a phone call. And I walked, I don't know for how long, but I walked and walked maybe 200 yards, and I walked directly to my brother. Jake was there. His body was laying just underneath tucked into like a little, it was a big giant boulder, and he was laying on his back, and he was obviously not alive. He didn't even look. I mean, it took me a minute to think, this has to be my brother, but it didn't even look human. I recognized his shirt. He was wearing an orange shirt, and I thought, I know that shirt. On one of his last Facebook posts, Jake had a picture of a whole bunch of t-shirts that somebody had given him as a hand-me-down, and he was so grateful and excited to have fancy clothes, and one of them was an orange shirt that was in this picture, and I thought, he's wearing that shirt that I had just saw not long ago. So I knew it was my brother, but he was, the condition he was in was awful, but we found him.
And the condition that he was in, was it just from decomposition?
Yes.
From being out in the elements for 3 weeks? Yeah,
so he died likely the night he went missing, so it had been almost 3 weeks at that point. The state of decomposition was horrifying. I mean, nothing on TV or in movies even compare to what he looked like. It was awful. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I have nightmares about it. And at first, I noticed his hands. I noticed he was very bloated. So I noticed his clothes were just tight on his body. And he was wearing a baseball cap, but he had obviously, I couldn't really tell how he died, but his face was partially gone. So, and I walked up on the side where it was missing. So I assumed he shot himself in the head, and his head was so swollen and big, and he had this baseball cap on, and it just looked tiny. It just looked like he was wearing a tiny little Mr. Potato Head hat kind of on his head. But I can still picture his feet, his legs spread out. Everything looked, I knew it was him, but it did not look like him. It was awful. It was awful, but also incredible. I just thought, I knew he was here. I knew we were going to find him. I hoped so much that we would find him alive, but I also am very grateful that we found him. There's so many families whose loved one goes missing, and especially in the mountains, and they never find them. So we felt very blessed to find him. And my sisters, I was just so thankful that they had just left. They weren't there to see it. I was thankful that nobody else had to see it. In fact, I called out to my husband once I established what I was looking at and that I found him. I just said, Casey, he's here. I found him. He's here. And so he came running, and I said, stop, you don't want to see this. So then he again called the police and said, we found him. He's here. My husband said, I was shaking, getting so emotional and shock. And my husband said, you need to sit down. And so I climbed onto the four-wheeler and sat down. And then I realized, this is not my four-wheeler. The the police told us, if you find anything, don't touch anything. Just call us. And I'm sitting on his four-wheeler. I'm like, my fingerprints are on the four-wheeler now. So, and things just started going fast. I thought I need to call my sisters and my mom and my dad and my brother, and they need to know. I need to tell them first. So I just immediately, I called my twin sister and I said, he's here. I found him. You need to come here. And she said, okay, where are you? And I had no idea where I was. The sheep or the deer hunter had told me, just go west, go north, go a little more south. So I had no idea where I was. I said, just come. And I hung up on her. She called me 2 or 3 more times saying, Alice, you need to tell me where you are. And I just told her, I need you to come here. Eventually she found me. But yes, I called my mom and I called my brother, who did not come for the search. He still wasn't really sure that it was even a good idea to be out there searching for him. He thought Jake was going to show up in a rehab or something somewhere. So those were difficult phone calls to make.
He had likely been there. Do you think that's where he sent you that text message from?
I'm assuming he sent the text possibly from there. I don't really know. We tried to find his phone and we couldn't ever find it. It wasn't with his belongings. Later the police, I believe, tried to trace his phone coordinates and where his last texts, messages, and things were sent, but we never found the phone. So we think he just threw it on his, in his anger. He obviously had rolled the four-wheeler, so he could have lost it. When I saw his body laying there, I thought, was he injured? When he wrecked his four-wheeler, did he get hurt? Did he die out here all alone because he was hurt? Nothing made sense. Even though I knew the answers, my brain was just kind of lagging, trying to fill in all of these holes that just my mind could not comprehend.
Way too much to process.
It was a lot to process, yes. So we know he died either late that Friday night or early Saturday morning. It was a really beautiful view where he was at, standing where he was laying down underneath that boulder. It was a really beautiful view. So he knew where he was going.
Was an autopsy done to determine?
Yes.
To rule out foul play or anything like that?
Yes. So the police came and we waited until they got his body out. It was such difficult terrain that they had to put him, they had a four-wheeler and a trailer. So they just put his body in a body bag and tied it to a trailer and drove him out. And they took all of his belongings that they could out of there and took it to a medical examiner for the autopsy. So I think we all assumed I hoped that he was high or so intoxicated that he just didn't know what he was doing. I didn't want to imagine him being sober and sad all alone, in the dark mountains, to die just all alone where we had just all ignored him. Me especially, I just ignored the text, deleted it. It just hurt my heart too much. I'd hoped he was high, and the autopsy results came back that he had alcohol in his system, but he didn't have any drugs, so he was not high. I think he had a little bit of cold syrup was something that he had drank, but otherwise there was no drugs in his system. And it did turn out that he shot himself, I believe, through his mouth. The side that I came up on was where the bullet came out of. So it was messy. It was sad. My dad had actually given him this gun. And when I found Jake and my husband told me, you need to go sit down, I thought, no, I have to go back to see, because the police asked us, is there a weapon? We need to make sure we know where it is. It's secured. So I went back and looked for it, and was tucked under he was left-handed anyway, and it was tucked under his body a little bit. So I had to go back and look at it again.
So do you think maybe like he shot himself and then fell on it? Or how would it get under his body after he pulled the trigger?
Yeah, I think his arms, with the way his body had swelled up, while decomposing, I think, just eventually kind of fell under him. His arms were like straight out and lifted a little bit. And I'm sure the recoil kind of bounced it around.
Since that time, you've experienced feelings of guilt.
Yeah, I had to question all of my choices in regard to how involved he was in my life, especially with my children. We had this beautiful experience when he lived with me, and I got to see him be really happy and healthy. And, my daughter, my baby, was a large part of that joy for him. And I had chosen to not allow him to be a part of their lives anymore. And I felt really guilty for taking that from him because of his choices. I think I thought what I was doing at the time was the right thing. I didn't know what he was capable of doing. And when it comes to getting drugs, really, I was scared. I didn't know what he was capable of doing. And if being high, using drugs like meth, you can become violent. I didn't know what to expect from him. So I felt very guilty about that. And then the text that I ignored, I knew. I went back to that moment where I thought, just tell him you love him. That's not going to hurt anything. What damage can that do? When he sobers up, I thought about him being sad and feeling all alone. And I knew in that moment I should have listened to that. I felt like maybe that was God giving me an opportunity to knowing what's coming for me later. I felt like it was maybe an opportunity that I ignored. And that definitely has brought a lot of guilt, but also taught me how to manage my relationships now. I do take those opportunities to tell people I love that I do love them. When my kids go to school, I have a 14-year-old who, is 14. She's a girl, and so she's angry a lot. And I always make sure she knows I love her, even if she is going to school mad at me for one reason or another. I want her to know the last thing she ever hears from me is that she is so loved. And I wanted Jake to know that too. When I stood there with his body, waiting for the police and even my husband to get there in those moments, it was awful and it was so sad, but it was almost like a tender moment with him where I just told him, that I loved him. I just felt overwhelmed with love for him. You see this dead body laying there and I'm seeing this person as that annoying little energetic brother, as a little kid, and I'm seeing that happy man who came to live with me and get clean and work so hard. I'm just seeing this whole life right in front of me that's ended. It was just such a tragedy, a loss that didn't have to happen. And I don't know if it would have changed anything. if I told him I loved him, if I replied to that text. I don't know if my dad would have reported him missing after that phone call or reached out for someone to go and intervene when he threatened to hurt himself. Maybe not, but I think it would have done something for me. I mean, it would have been peace of mind for me to know I did all I could for him.
Just his lifestyle. He spent so much time on his own, alone.
Yeah.
Just with his own thoughts.
Yes.
I think he had to know that he was loved.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he knows he is loved. I hope he knew he was loved. He was okay alone, but he was, I think he craved belonging, somewhere to belong his whole life. He was bullied as a kid. I mean, he was different. He was actually, as a kid, he liked to, we would fight over the princess dresses to wear when we were dressing up and playing as little kids, and so when he went to school, he got called derogatory names for his sexual orientation. And later in his life, he came out as a gay man. And in a small community like we were in, that at that time was hard for him to find any amount of acceptance, though I think he knew he was accepted by our family, which I'm thankful for. God was always very important to him. I think he had this internal struggle for pleasing God and disappointing him. So that was difficult for him. So anyway, yes, he was accustomed to being alone. He spent the majority of his adult life alone. And I hope he felt loved, but also he was sad enough to end his life, so he could have felt more loved.
Well, your intuition about what would happen that day sure turned out to be correct.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, that was a really interesting experience for me. I've always believed in God and in a higher power, and I do believe that he is a loving God, so I believe he's interested in our lives, and we can find him in the details of our lives. I don't think he takes away the hard things from us, but he'll help us through them. And that morning, I was very dependent on him getting us through that day. And I knew we were going to find him. And I knew I had to do everything I could do I had to be willing to do whatever he asked me to do so we could find him.
Sometimes I feel like the word closure is kind of overrated.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice that you found him, you were able to bring him home, give him a proper funeral, but it's still a tragic loss of someone you love.
It was such a tragic loss, and I don't even know what closure would mean. I don't think there is closure, though I do think finding your missing person is huge. Part of maybe closure, at least it's an answer. But his funeral, we did have a funeral for him, but our dad, who was sick, had an infection that had been growing, and he just had a medical crisis and ended up, so we had the funeral, but we didn't get to do any kind of ceremony. We had Jake cremated, so we didn't even get to do anything with his ashes. It ended abruptly to get him to the hospital, and then spent the next several weeks and months with my dad on full life support. So that was scary. We almost lost him. He ended up living, but that was also very scary and difficult and so Yeah, I mean, I'm not as close to my dad as maybe I would like to be, but my heart feels for him because he that last conversation he had with my brother is something that's probably very difficult, to live with.
What's the best memory you have with Jake?
That's a good question. I have so many memories with him. Okay, so when he lived with me, toward the end, he was getting ready to do some missionary service. And one day when we were shopping, he saw a ring that had it had like a chain in the middle that you could spin, kind of like what is a fidget ring now that's people like to have for anxiety. Anyway, he liked it. And so I bought it for him and gave it to him. And it was just, it's not even fancy or anything. It was just a ring. And I gave it to him and he was so grateful. Jake was so humble. He never had anything. And when he died, everything he owned, he carried in a backpack, He wasn't very worldly. So after they took Jake's body out, the next week we had the funeral and my brother had flown in for the funeral and just before it, I took him up to the location where we found Jake so he could see it. And so I was giving him a minute there and I was wandering around the area and I don't know how far away I walked. I couldn't even turn around and see where my other brother was, but I just was walking and in the dirt I saw this silver ring just sitting in the dirt, not anywhere near the four-wheeler. It was just kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it was that that it's called, it has CTR on it, which means choose the right. And it was that same ring that I had bought for Jake 15 years ago. And it just was brought back such a special memory of a time when Jake was so happy. And then I got to have that time with him. I don't know. And it was just such a random find in the great outdoors in the mountains to look down and first of all see that he still had it all these years later, but that it was there. And so I have that ring and it's something that reminds me of a happy time in his life, which is something I've needed in coming to terms with, all the things that I saw. Seeing his body like that is traumatic and gives me nightmares. And I've had to do a lot of therapy and trying to live with those images. So that ring is something that is a good reminder of happy memories and a happier time.
Who would have thought just a random impulse purchase and now it holds so much for you? Yes.
Oh yeah. It was, back then it was fairly meaningless because it wasn't expensive or anything, but it was important to him. And it just told me that, I don't know, I think the fact that he still had it was sentimental value only, which means, number one, that I felt loved by him. And I hoped it reminded him that I also loved him, so that was special.
If you or someone you know here in the U.S. is struggling with suicidal thoughts, you can call the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255 anytime, day or night. The crisis text line also provides free 24/7 confidential support by text message when you send a message to 741-741. If you want to see pictures related to this episode, or really any past episode, you can see them by looking at the show notes. You've probably heard me mention the show notes in a lot of the previous episodes, but I wanted to let you know that when you click on the episode on your phone, what you're seeing is a text description of that episode. The full show notes with pictures are at the podcast website. You can always find it by going to the name of the show, then a slash, and the episode number. So for example, this week's episode show notes with pictures can be seen at whatwasthatlike.com/123, because this is episode number 123. I only recently realized that I should clarify that because I was visiting with some family and I was talking with my nephew Scott, who listens to the podcast. He was clicking and viewing what he thought were the show notes, but he always wondered, where are the pictures? So thanks, Scott, for letting me know that I need to clear up that confusion. All right, a couple more things before we get to another great story. First, I just released the newest raw audio. The raw audio episodes are bonus episodes where you hear actual 911 emergency calls and the stories that go with them. Usually there are 3 of them in each episode. In this newest one, you'll hear a man calling about a carjacking on the interstate.
She's in the bed of my truck right now. She's got a machete and an automatic pistol. The car has been abandoned in the middle of Interstate 40.
A man calls because he's just accidentally driven his SUV into a pond.
Hurry up.
Sir, they're on the way. Are you in the car?
Yeah, I'm in the car.
And several people call to report an active shooter at the local mall.
What's going on? There were shots fired and a kid came running up to our car asking for help, and he was covered in blood and there were shots being fired.
This raw audio episode is number 28. So when you sign up as a supporter for $5 a month, you can binge all 28 episodes. You also get all the new What Was That Like episodes ad-free. And you get a sticker and a handwritten note from me. And a personal audio message from me. You can get all of that by becoming a supporter at whatwasthatlike.com/support. Not to mention, you'll be helping to support the show, which I greatly appreciate. And about those handwritten notes, sometimes people ask me, do you really write those yourself? And the answer is yes, I do. In fact, you can see me writing one of them on my TikTok channel at What Was That Like? No spaces. And I have to tell you, we're having some great conversations in the What Was That Like listener Facebook group. We talk about the newest podcast episodes when they come out, but lots of other stuff too. In fact, I recently posted a question for the roughly 3,500 people in that group. I asked, how did you find out you were being cheated on? And as you can imagine, that generated some truly interesting stories. If you want to join me and the other listeners there, we'd love to have you. And for a limited time, you can join that group for free. Just kidding, it's always free. whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. All right, now we've come to this week's listener story. This one is from Bill, and you'll probably be able to tell by his voice he's a podcaster. His show is called When Dating Hurts, and he talks to guests who tell their stories of dating and domestic violence. Bill shared his own story on What Was That Like about a year ago, when he told the story of his daughter Kristen being murdered by her boyfriend. You can find out more about his story and his work at whendatinghurts.com. In this listener story, Bill tells about the time he met one of his idols. Stay safe, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Hi, I'm Bill Mitchell. Back in 1972, I was an art student at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Today, they call that school MICA. It's in Baltimore, Maryland. I was a graphic designer, at least I was working my way into becoming one. Way before I went to art school, I was very much into the work of the paintings of Norman Rockwell. Some people would refer to Rockwell as an illustrator, and they wouldn't allow that he was actually an artist. Fine artists didn't see him as a fine artist or even an artist. He was an illustrator, which was their way of saying he got paid for what he did. But I was very much into him, and in the summer of 1972, I was 21, and I had to go to pick up some things at a store, and there was a rack of paperbacks there. And I saw a book called My Adventures as an Illustrator by Norman Rockwell. So I picked it up because I was curious to see the backstory on Norman Rockwell, and I just couldn't put it down. Took his story all the way back to being a little scrawny boy growing up in New England, and kind of took you through his time working as the top art person at Boys Life, and then doing paintings for them and drawings for them, and later his work with the Saturday Evening Post and the paintings he did for World War II, and on and on and on. I mean, just thousands of paintings, I guess, really. And I thought, well, wait a minute, how old is this man? And I found out that he was 78, which when you're 21 or 22, somebody's 78, it seems like that guy could leave us at any moment. And I thought, well, wow, I'd really love to meet this man. I didn't know where he lived precisely. So I sent out some letters and I tried to find out through the library. Of course, in 1972, you had no access to the internet, didn't have Google. But I found out he lived in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And I thought, I've got to meet this guy. I've got to shake his hand. I need to make contact with him. So all I knew was that he lived in Stockbridge. And on the map, of course, I could see it's going to take me a while to get there. And I thought, I'm doing this. Around the corner lived my girlfriend, who is currently now my wife all these years. So anyway, the deal was I'd pick her up at about 3 a.m. and we would just go to Stockbridge. Didn't have an address, didn't have an invitation. We're going to meet this guy. So off we went, my little Volkswagen, and got up there somewhere around, I'd say 9 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't have an address, so I thought I'd just meet people and ask where Norman Rockwell lives. Well, they didn't really want to tell me. They looked at him as he's kind of this treasure of theirs, and they're not going to have some guy from out of town just go and bother this man. I mean, I actually stopped, saw some guys getting ready to tee off on a golf course, ran up to them. They looked at each other and said, well, we really don't want to say. I couldn't get it out of anyone until I bumped into some guy who was mowing a lawn. I walked up, and this young kid, and I asked if he knew where Norman Rockwell lived, and he said he lives around the corner here. Just go down the end of the street, make a right, take a look down a gray gravel driveway, and you'll see his studio. And I'd seen pictures of the studio. I'd read this book. We kind of drove down that way, and my wife and I got out, and I was plenty nervous. Started walking up this short driveway and could see through the side window, which was like the northern window, because artists or illustrators know to have the northern light coming in through the window because it doesn't change as much during the course of a day, so that their paintings won't change colors as much because of the light. But I could see this white-haired man inside, and I just said, that's got to be him. So we started to go up the driveway a little bit, and then a door opened. I thought it was him, but it wasn't. Some man who looked like he's probably more like 50 years old, who walked up and intercepted us, and kind of a big guy. And he walked up and he said, what's this all about? And I told him who I was. I was this art student, and I introduced my wife to be. And I said, I just wanted to come up and meet this great man. He had influenced me so much. And he said, look, I really appreciate the fact that you came up here, but Mr. Rockwell has been traveling. He just got back yesterday, and he has things to do in the studio today. So I'm just sorry. It's so nice of you to come up, but I can't. And I thought about the book, and I ventured, are you Louis Lamoni? And he said, well, yeah, I am. And I turned to my wife. I said, wow, this man is Louis Lamoni. And back in 1954, Mr. Rockwell had projects to do and needed photos taken as reference for his paintings. And as it turns out, he found out about Louis Lamoni here, and he was an amateur photographer, and darn if they didn't strike up this relationship. And I turned to him and I said, and I guess it's still going strong. And he said, well, yes, it is. So this man was pretty impressed that I'd done my homework and I was really into this. I wasn't just some pesty tourist. So he said, I can't really make any promises, but I can go and talk with them, and I'll let you know what happens. And the next thing you know, he went into the studio and came back and said, well, as it turns out, Mr. Rockwell said, you can come in for a few minutes, you can meet him. So we must have spent the better part of an hour in that studio with Norman Rockwell, with Louis Lamoni. I didn't even ask, and he started giving me a tour of his studio. He showed me where he keeps his brushes and where he cleans them, and he's showing me his easel, which was set up there. And so that was it. That was our meeting with Norman Rockwell. And it was just this perfect day. It was August of 72. I'll never forget it. And to me, I usually use that story as one of these things where it's like, if you really have your heart set on something, you should pursue it. I didn't really think, that I would meet him and have that happen like it did. It was just a perfect meeting, just long enough, just great enough. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that, and thank you for listening.